Pay attention when humans say something feels off. You humans can smell lies. That's insane. Captain Relic of the Brone Empire leaned back in his chair, segmented arms folded across his chitinous chest. Despite the translator's flat voice, his chitin face managed to convey pure skepticism. Across the table, Commander Hayes simply shrugged, a faint smirk playing at the corners of his lips. It's not about lies, Captain. It's about noticing things that don't add up. He gestured toward his steaming cup of coffee. Call it intuition if you want, but when something feels wrong, it probably is. Relic clicked his mandibles together in what his species considered a polite laugh. Even years after Earth's formal induction into the Galactic Concord, humans remained an enigma to the Brone. They were such small, unassuming bipeds, lacking both the physical might of the Malg and the advanced neural networks of the Chon. Yet somehow, in their brief time among the stars, they developed quite the reputation for achieving the improbable. Some called it luck, others weren't so sure. You believe this intuition can replace data analysis and proper protocols? Relic's tone bordered on condescension. It's not about replacing anything, Hayes replied, leaning forward with sudden seriousness. It's about paying attention to what data can't measure. Let me give you an example. He paused, his expression intensifying. Back on Earth, during a routine cargo inspection, one of our officers noticed something odd. The cargo bay smelled like motor oil, but the manifest listed medical supplies. The computers didn't flag it because technically everything checked out. But that smell, it didn't fit. His voice lowered meaningfully. Turned out those crates were full of contraband weapons. Relic's antennae twitched in surprise. You caught an arms smuggler because someone noticed a smell? Exactly. Before Relic could respond, a chime echoed through the room. The ship's AI interrupted, its artificial tone perfectly monotone. Captain Relic, Commander Hayes, your presence is required on the bridge. The incoming vessel has deviated from its declared trajectory. Relic's expression darkened as he rose from his seat. Let's see if your intuition is any use here. The bridge of the Brone cruiser Talarique was a sleek, angular space dominated by holographic displays. The incoming ship, a freighter registered to the Thrall Consortium, had veered off its assigned route by several degrees, edging dangerously close to an asteroid belt. Thrall ships don't make navigation errors, Hayes muttered, stepping closer to the main display to study the vessel's trajectory. What's their explanation? None so far, the comms officer replied. They're refusing to answer our hails. Relic's mandibles tightened. Prepare an intercept course. If they won't respond, we'll board them. Bad idea. Hayes shook his head. They're baiting us. The Brone captain turned sharply. Baiting us? For what purpose? Hayes gestured at the asteroid belt on the display. That's not just an asteroid belt, it's a dead zone for long-range sensors. If you send your ship in there, you'll lose comms and visibility. His voice hardened. Perfect place for an ambush. And what evidence do you have for this theory? Relic scoffed. Surely even your intuition requires some basis in fact. Hayes pointed at the trajectory again. The Thrall are perfectionists. They don't make mistakes like this. If they're off course, it's deliberate. And if it's deliberate, here is a reason. He paused meaningfully. Think about it. Why would they want us in that belt? Relic's antennae twitched again. He hated to admit it, but the human's reasoning had merit. What do you suggest then? Let them think we've taken the bait, Hayes said. But instead of following them in, we send a probe ahead. If here is an ambush waiting, the probe will flush it out. The Brone captain considered this for a moment. He didn't like taking advice from a species so new to interstellar diplomacy, but Hayes had a point. Very well. Deploy the probe. The small, sleek device launched from the Talarique's hull, streaking toward the asteroid belt. The bridge fell silent as everyone watched its progress on the holographic display. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. Then the probe's feed cut out. "Something's jamming it," the comms officer reported. Hayes nodded grimly. "Here is your proof. No way that's natural interference." Before Relic could issue an order, the ship's sensors lit up with new contacts. 5 vessels emerged from the asteroid belt, their weapons powered and aimed directly at the Tal Reef. They were Malro raiders, a brutal species infamous for their piracy. "Shields up," Relic barked. "All hands to battle station." The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as officers scrambled to respond. Hayes, meanwhile, stayed calm, watching the display with a calculating expression. "They're expecting you to fight," he said. "But what if we don't give them the chance?" Relic shot him a glare. "You have a better idea, human." Hayes grinned. "Just one. Let's make them think we're more trouble than we're worth." Without waiting for permission, Hayes leaned over the tactical console and began inputting commands. Moments later, the Tal Reef's external speakers blared to life. The ship's lights began to flicker erratically, and its energy signature spiked to alarming levels. "What are you doing?" Relic demanded. "Making them think we've got a secret weapon," Hayes replied. "The Malro are bullies, they prey on weakness. But if they think we're about to unleash something they can't handle..." His voice trailed off meaningfully. For a moment it seemed like the gamble wouldn't pay off. The Malro ships held their positions, weapons still trained on the cruiser. Then, one by one, they began to retreat, disappearing back into the asteroid belt. As the last raider vanished from sensors, Relic turned to Hayes with an expression that could only be described as grudging respect. "Perhaps there is something to this intuition of yours." Hayes shrugged, his smirk returning. "Told you, sometimes you just have to trust what feels off." Relic paced the bridge, his mandibles clicking as he reviewed the sensor logs. "The Malro retreating so easily feels suspicious. Why would they back down without even testing our defenses?" "Because bullies don't like risks," Hayes replied, leaning casually against a console. "They saw the energy surge and decided we weren't worth the hassle. Simple as that." Relic's antennae twitched, a clear sign of his lingering doubts. Simple answers rarely hold true in complex situations. What if this was just a probe, a way to gauge our response? Hayes folded his arms, his expression turning thoughtful. "If that's the case, then they'll regroup and try again. But here is the thing, Captain, they won't use the same tactic twice. That's not their style. If they come back, they'll have a new angle." Relic considered this. He disliked the humans' informal demeanor, but Hayes had a knack for cutting through the noise and focusing on what mattered. "If they return, we need to be ready." "Suggestions?" Hayes pushed off the console and stepped toward the tactical display. "First, we need to figure out what they really wanted. Attacking a Brone warship head-on isn't standard Malro behavior. They're opportunists. This feels bigger than a random raid." "Agreed. Their initial move seemed calculated. We need answers." Relic turned to his comms officer. "Has the Thrall freighter resumed communication?" "Yes, Captain. They claim they were forced off course by a gravitational anomaly, but their explanation is unconvincing." "Convenient timing," Hayes muttered. "Let's talk to them face to face, if possible." Relic hesitated. Allowing a human to take the lead in an interrogation was unorthodox, but Hayes had proven himself valuable. "Very well. We'll bring the freighter captain aboard for questioning, but I will lead the interrogation." "Fine by me," Hayes said with a shrug. "Just let me be in the room. Sometimes it helps to have a different perspective." Within the hour, the Thrall captain was escorted onto the Tal Reef. His tall, wiry frame and translucent skin shimmered under the ship's artificial lights, an unsettling sight for most species unfamiliar with the Thrall. His large black eyes darted nervously between Relic and Hayes as he entered the interrogation chamber. "Captain Vac," Relic began, his tone sharp, "your freighter's deviation from its assigned route nearly brought disaster upon this vessel. Explain yourself." Visay wrung his long, bony hands. "It was not intentional, I assure you. The gravitational anomaly." "Cut the act," Hayes interrupted. Here is no record of any anomaly in this sector. You are hiding something and we need to know what it is. Sound. Nervous shifting. The Thrall captain stiffened, his gaze flickering toward Hayes. I am merely a trader. Our shipment is legitimate, I swear it. Relic leaned forward, his antennae twitching aggressively. Your silence will not protect you if we discover you've been colluding with the Malro. VC's composure cracked, his voice trembling as he spoke. It wasn't my choice. The Malro intercepted us weeks ago. They forced us to carry their cargo or face destruction. What kind of cargo? Hayes pressed. The Thrall hesitated. Weapons. Advanced prototypes stolen from the Chon. The Malro intended to use our freighter as bait, drawing in a Concorde vessel so they could ambush it and retrieve their shipment. Relic slammed a fist onto the table, his frustration evident. Why didn't you report this to Concorde authorities? They threatened to destroy us if we deviated from their plan, Vak said, his voice barely a whisper. I had no choice. Hayes nodded slowly. Okay, if what you are saying is true, we've got bigger problems. Those weapons can't fall into Malro hands. Agreed. We'll seize the cargo and secure it on the Tal'Rik. Then we'll escort your freighter back to Concorde space for further investigation. Vichi's panic was immediate. No, you don't understand. If you take the cargo, the Malro will hunt us down. They'll stop at nothing. Enough. Relic silenced him with a sharp gesture. You've already endangered this ship. Be grateful we're not holding you responsible for this debacle. As Vak was escorted out, Hayes turned to Relic. We need to be smart about this. If the Malro realize we have the cargo, they'll come after us too. Then we'll ensure they don't find out. Prepare a decoy. We'll make it appear as though the freighter still has the weapons while we secure the real cargo aboard the Tal'Rik. Hayes grinned. Now you are thinking like a human. The operation to transfer the weapons was executed with precision. Crates of advanced Chon prototypes were quietly moved to the Tal'Rik's secure hold while identical-looking decoys were left aboard the freighter. Think they'll take the bait? Hayes joined Relic on the bridge. Relic stared at the holographic display. The Malro are many things, but subtle is not one of them. If they're watching, they'll strike soon. Hayes crossed his arms. And if they're not, then we've underestimated their cunning, Relic replied, and that would be unfortunate. The minutes dragged on, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, the sensors pinged, multiple Malro ships closing in on the freighter's position. There they are, Relic's mandibles clicked. Hayes leaned forward, eyes narrowing. They're not even trying to hide. That's a lot of firepower for a single freighter. They must think the weapons are still on board. Good. But as the Malro ships closed in, something unexpected happened. Instead of engaging the freighter directly, they deployed a swarm of smaller drones. They're checking for the cargo, Hayes muttered. They're not taking any chances. Relic's expression darkened. If they discover the deception, they'll know the weapons are here. Prepare for battle. Hayes stared at the display, his mind racing. We need another move, something they won't see coming. The Malro drones hovered over the freighter, their scans becoming increasingly invasive. Hayes's mind churned with possibilities. If the Malro figured out the cargo was a decoy, their next move would be swift and brutal. Hayes turned to Relic. We need to disrupt their scans. If they can't get a clear read, they'll waste time second-guessing. How do you propose we do that? Deploy a micro-pulse emitter. Flood the area with low-level interference. It'll make their drones think the freighter is carrying something it's not, something volatile. Relic's mandibles clicked in consideration. That could provoke them into destroying the freighter outright. Or it could make them cautious. Hayes countered. Think about it, if they believe the cargo is some kind of unstable prototype, they won't risk firing. They'll try to board instead. After a tense moment, Relic nodded. Do it. The Tal'Rik's engineers worked quickly, releasing a pulse emitter disguised as debris. As it activated, the drones began to falter, their scans producing erratic results. Hayes watched as the Malro ships slowed their approach, their aggressive formation loosening. They're hesitating. They think the freighter's carrying something dangerous. Relic clicked his mandibles in approval. Good. That gives us the element of surprise. Target their lead ship, disable. The Tal'Rik's weapon systems sprang to life, launching a precise volley at the Malro flagship. The barrage struck its engines, sending it spiraling off course. "They're disoriented," Relic said. "Focus fire on the smaller vessels, keep them off balance." As the Tal'Rik engaged the Malro fleet, Hayes' attention shifted back to the freighter. The drones, despite their interference, had begun returning to their mother ships. Hayes felt a prickle of unease. Something didn't add up. "Captain," Hayes said urgently. The drones weren't just scanning the freighter, they were stalling. Relic's antennae shot upright. Stalling for what? Before Hayes could answer, the ship's sensors lit up with new contacts. A second Malro fleet emerged from the asteroid belt, larger and more heavily armed than the first. "They played us," Hayes muttered. "The first group was a distraction, the real force just arrived." "All hands prepare for evasive maneuvers," Relic commanded. "Focus shields on the forward quadrant." The Tal'Rik lurched as it dodged incoming fire, its shields absorbing the brunt of the assault. Despite the chaos, Hayes' mind was already working on a new plan. "Captain," he said, "if we're going to get out of this, we need to turn their own tactics against them." Relic glanced at him, his antennae signaling skepticism. "Explain." "They've underestimated us once," Hayes said. "Let's make them do it again. If we make them think the weapons are about to detonate, they'll prioritize getting out of range." "And how do you suggest we convince them of that?" Hayes grinned. "Remember that energy surge we used earlier? Let's amplify it. Overload the emitter to simulate a critical failure. Add some carefully timed weapon discharges for effect. They'll think the freighter is about to blow." Relic considered the plan, then nodded sharply. "Do it. But if this fails, the consequences will be dire." Hayes rushed to the tactical console, coordinating with the engineers to overload the emitter. Moments later, the freighter's energy signature began to spike dramatically. The Malro fleet reacted immediately, their ships began pulling back, their formations breaking apart as they tried to distance themselves from the supposed explosion. "Captain," Hayes said, "we've got a narrow window. If we're going to make our move, it's now." "Target their flagship's bridge," Relic commanded. "Disable their command structure." The Tal'Rik's main cannon fired a single devastating blast that struck the Malro flagship dead center. The ship's bridge went dark, and the remaining Malro vessels faltered, their coordination collapsing. "Now target their engines," Relic commanded. "Leave them stranded." Within minutes, the battlefield fell silent. The Malro fleet, once a formidable threat, was reduced to a collection of disabled vessels floating aimlessly in the void. Relic turned to Hayes, his antennae signaling grudging respect. "Your tactics were unconventional but effective. Perhaps there is more to this human intuition than I realized." Hayes smirked. "Told you. Sometimes you just have to trust what feels off." As the Tal'Rik began its journey back to Concord space, Hayes allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Humanity might not have the strength of the Malro or the technology of the Chon, but they had something else, a knack for noticing the details everyone else overlooked. Sometimes that made all the difference.